Hi. I just want to put my two pennies in the bucket against and maybe in contrast with, comparison or contrast with what the governor of Oregon has posted. Kate Brown, her pronouns are she, her, hers, um, has posted on Instagram here. And I believe in lies, damn lies, and statistics. And what that is, for anybody who's familiar, is statistics are numbers and they can be manipulated fairly easily. You can take numbers and make something seem really bad, or take some similar numbers and make something seem not so bad or really good or whatever. And I think hopefully a lot of us are familiar with that idea. Not that it always happens, but there's always a tendency to happen, even when people are crunching numbers very honestly. That can happen. The deal is that there's a story around each bit of data that story, just like it's rhetoric, so it's like it's an opinion. You're backing it with numerical figures, but those figures, if you go tell two people to go count all the people in a grocery store or something, they're probably going to come back with at least slightly different numbers, maybe because of the time of day or all sorts of variances, right? Not necessarily because they're dishonest. There could be dishonesty there, especially if there's a motive of like, okay, you go count the people at the grocery store, and if there's less than 10 people, then we'll go buy you pizza and ice cream or whatever, like that kind of a thing. So then you start factoring in, well, there's a motive to wait outside the grocery store, or keep counting the people and then run home and give the count when it's, or call home or whatever you do, to give the count whenever it is ideal for you to do so. So that being said, obviously there's motive, or possibly lack of, but everything's biased. There's no way that anything can be unbiased, because without biasness, you lack that story around the data, and everything's just numbers floating out in the air, and who did what and what context and all this thing. So as soon as you wrap that context around something, you have bias. Like, if you are trying to determine how many grains of sand there are on a typical planet, and you are somehow able to count them all, you're probably picking which planets, out of favoring how close they are to you, or different features like that. So, or maybe that the sand's easily accessible on. So yeah, lies, damn lies, and statistics is the thing. And of course, I don't know if I just clarified that or not, but the thing is that, there's basically saying that, there's lies, and then there's damn lies, and then there's statistics. Like, looking at, it's a very pessimistic view of statistics. So with that being said, I'm going to sort of give the glass is half empty perspective, but by me telling you the glass is half empty, that means that we, the drinkers, are therefore half full. And that is a good thing. So right here on Oregon Gov Brown, Kate Brown, current governor of Oregon, as of this time and date here, Friday, October 23rd, 2020, at 5 p.m. So this is a thing reposted off of Oregon, apparently off of Health Oregon org, coronavirus, and it represents national statistics, supposedly. I real quick went to their site, and I wasn't able to find this, but I can believe it was there. And it says, fact, COVID-19 is more deadly than the seasonal flu. National estimates, national, so that would be nationwide, assumingly across the United States. National estimates of the last 3 flu seasons indicate that 0.06% to 0.14% of Americans who contracted influenza died from it. On the other hand, national data shows that 2.8% of people diagnosed with COVID-19 have died, at least 20 times as fatal as the flu. Okay, so if you do go get the surface data on the last few years of the seasonal flu from the CDC, you are going to find that the 0.06 numbers to the 0.14 are pretty accurate, in my opinion. Um, that there's tons of variances. That's just, that's the surface numbers, which we can go by, because what else do we have? We can start manipulating those statistics, and we can get them to vary, definitely. And those are estimated supposedly within they use like a Bayesian filter to determine the likelihood that, because they don't know for sure, you know what I mean, that type of a thing. So it depends on how much you agree with those statistics, whether or not, like, you need to dig in for yourself to find out whether or not those include pneumonia, and you might want to add in pneumonia. There's strains of influenza that can't be tested for, things like that. Some of that is taken into account with those numbers. So anyway, that's a probable number. I'm not trying to say good or bad or anything. I'm just saying that's a probable number, and we're going to just go ahead and move forward with that number so we don't spend all day otherwise. I haven't crunched the national data against that. I could imagine that number might be true. You're welcome to. You can do. I'm going to crunch this data against the state of Oregon, because specifically, that's what matters, is what's going on in this state. I mean, of course, we should consider what's going on in the nation as a whole, but how can we trust 50 other states have 50 other ways of doing things? They might be, some of them might be very similar, some of them are drastically different. The amount of testing that gets done could be drastically different throughout states. So if we go over here, that being said, so I'm going to go right here. Here's Oregon Gov, the coronavirus data as of today, 10/23. That is how many, and of course, there's all indicators are lagging, right? This isn't like a number that's going to be updated every 5 minutes or something, but within the last week or so, probably, or at least maybe even the last couple days or so. Total cases, this many reported cases or presumed cases, however they figure that. Total deaths, these are people that are presumed or have tested with COVID positive. So the fact of the matter is that some deaths that aren't necessarily due to COVID specifically end up in that number. That's just the way it goes. We could say that to some degree, maybe for even the influenza deaths. But I would encourage you to dig in for yourself and to consult your own medical sources as far as combining that data, and I think a nice variety of people doing that is what we need, because otherwise we end up with like people who are going to get the pizza and the ice cream. If one side of the coin lands heads up, and the people who are going to miss out, if that side, you know what I mean? Like, basically the pizza and ice cream for the general population would be like, hey, phase 3, everything back to normal, forget the mask, like, let's go do this, all that kind of thing. I consider that pizza and ice cream for the public. Pizza and ice cream for the governors is, hey, you get to continue with your power trip and lockdown and do all of this manipulation that goes along with that. You're welcome and entitled to your own opinion on that, of course, but there are facts to show that in these times of crisis that governors benefit from this stuff. They take power grabs and they don't let go. This was originally to flatten a curve. That curve never existed in Oregon, and I'll just leave it at that. So the total deaths, 649. This is since March. We're now in October. That's 7 months later. That's less than 100. That's, you could arguably say that's 100 deaths a month in the entire state from this. And half the time or more, people weren't wearing masks. Positive test, there you go, negative test, and total tested. So let's do a quick bit of math here. So we have 649 total deaths in Oregon, plus or minus. I think the number could be even less, most likely. And positive test, so over 39261 equals 0.017, but we need to multiply that by 100 to get a percentage. So we have 1.7, 1.65, however you want to look at that, a little over 1.5% of people who have tested, or I would assume, maybe tested positive, maybe it's presumed, who knows, one and a half, a little over one and a half out of 100 people, less than 2 out of 100 people, which is, that's basically one of the numbers they were trying to say. If we could get down to like that or lower. Oregon doesn't do a lot of testing. I mean, they do some. They've total tested. They do, that would average out to 100,000 a month over the last so many months or so, little over 100,000 a month, I guess. So it's just, we don't do the most testing. We could always test more, right? And the more you test, the reason is, my argument on that is that I think that they're testing enough so that they can say, hey, look, the cases are going up, but they're not testing enough to spread that gap to show how low this number is. You know what I mean? Because if you could go running around and, if you tested every person that walked in every grocery store, that number is going to spike. There's a fair amount of people, supposedly, that don't even have symptoms whatsoever. There's a fair amount of people who have mild to moderate symptoms. So those two huge chunks of people probably aren't going to get tested. The people who are going to get tested are the people who go to the hospital. You know what I mean? There's around this area for sure, there's no testing centers. There's just that. There's medical places and mental health places and stuff like that with tents set up outside. And if you go walk by or drive by those tents, they're empty. They're just big white tents that are just sitting there as if like whatever. To my knowledge, they've pretty much always been empty, and it's just whatever. So anyway, I just want to show that. So right there, that contradicts her number where it's like, why are you posting this thing of 2.8? That's a national average. That's New York and California and their numbers in there that anybody could argue about combined. So that doesn't speak for the rest of the country, I don't feel like. So that's a 75% roughly. That's a 75% tilt in the favor of them getting the pizza and the ice cream and getting to keep us locked down. Okay. And then, so here's where I'm going to tilt the numbers back towards us using publicly available data from the WHO and the CDC. So if you look up, if you just type in like 10% infected in any search engine, you're probably going to find an endless list of news stories that say Geneva, the head of emergencies at the World Health Organization, said Monday the agency's quote-unquote best estimates indicate roughly 1 in 10 people, which is 10% of people worldwide, may have been infected by the coronavirus, more than 20 times the number of confirmed cases, and warned of a difficult period ahead. So for one thing, if that's true, then that means this positive test would have to go up 20 times, so if we did that and say, and they said more than 20 times, so that means at least 20 times, right, by their best estimates. So if we say 39,261 times 20 equals that, 785,000, we'll round it down to. So 649 over 785. 1, 2, 3 equals. So this e to the minus 4 means there's an 8 with 3 zeros in front of it. We multiply that times 100. Well, let's just go ahead and say times 100 equals, and then you can see it's 0.08% of people have died of that. And that's just factoring the WHO, the World Health Organization estimates in with those national CDC numbers. So then when we come back here, we see that that number is in between and much closer to a lower seasonal flu rate here. And this is going by their minimums that they're stating, right? So even if I wanted to say, well, if we did some rounding, we could push it up towards this 0.14, we can't, because I already rounded in favor of them getting the pizza and ice cream right there. So that's that with that number right there. Please double check the math. These are just numbers just to show you what the truth, how, like if I tell the story, these are the numbers you're going to see. If they tell the story, those are the numbers you're going to see. Okay. And then if we say, okay, what is 10% of the world's population here? I don't think I can open another calculator. No. Oh, yeah, cool. So, 7.8 billion people in the world. So there's hundreds, thousands, millions, billions, 7.8 billion. And then to get 10%, you multiply that times that. And that reads, if you read it, it would be like 10%. And then, this is the decimal representation of 10%. This is the mathematical representation of the word of, multiplication. And there's 7.8 billion. So this will give us 10% of 7.8 billion, which is 780 million. Okay. And now we want to find out the number. So COVID deaths total. This is in the world, not just in the United States. So as of today, so that statement, if you look, was made Monday, the agency, that Monday was October the 5th of 2020. We're now weeks past there. That was, this article was written October the 5th. It says Monday. I know a lot of journalistic articles will say the day, even though instead of saying today. But, it could have even been a week older. But we'll just go with the fact that it was on the same day they wrote the article, right? So now we're like 3 weeks later, roughly. We're way over here. So there's there's 1 week, 2 weeks, almost 3 weeks later. And I think that's a really good amount of time, because now, even if somebody, by their best estimates, even if somebody caught it right that day they made that estimate, or I'm imagine they probably made the estimate maybe even days before, but right that day when they broadcast that estimate, then now we're nearly 3 weeks past, which is a time when you could consider that, okay, if the mortality rate would have probably gone up, as much as I hate to say that. Okay, so we go over here and we get that death rate. Most of these trackers that I've seen, this one's only in the United States. This one, I think, is this Worldometer. My mouse is freezing up. They're pretty darn close. Whichever one of the top search results I've ever gone to, they seem to be pretty close to accurate. Some of them, give or take a day, maybe, I guess you could say. So here's the number, which is, I would say, like 70-ish thousand more people than the last time I came here. This number includes everything. You know what I mean? Go look up what type of factors go into this number. This is worldwide. A lot of people think that 1 million people have died in the U.S. This is in every one of those countries in the world that's reporting any numbers. And who knows, maybe even presumptive cases or estimates. I don't know. You'll have to look up that for yourself. Okay, so remember that number, 780 million. We're going to clear this out and paste in that number and put it over 780. There's 780,000. There's 780 million equals, and don't get too excited yet, we need to multiply it times 100. All right, there we go. So 0.14, you could round that up to 1.5, right? Just to be, it's not getting any lower, right? So 0.15% of people have presumably died of coronavirus across the entire world. Well, if we come back over to this number here, that's right there against that high seasonal flu death rate. So what's going on here? You know what I mean? Like, are we cherry picking numbers? Because I think I'm doing wide swoops here. You know what I mean? And I do this all the time. I'm not doing it just because, I want to make the statement when the water's the right temperature or something. So, and that's it. We don't need to slide the decimal around. That's 0.14, 0.15. That is very close to a seasonal flu. That's not even a pandemic flu, which we have all the time. You know what I mean? Or relatively speaking, depending on who you're talking to, of course. But every few to several years, there's a quote-unquote pandemic flu where the rate is much higher. This is seasonal. This is every single year. You know what I mean? roughly. Like one year might be half that, the next year might be that. Sometimes even worse just with the seasonal flu. The getting the flu shot, depending on what year and what data you're looking at, sometimes the number of flu cases goes up, sometimes it goes down. It's roughly almost, if you averaged it, I think, don't take my word on it, do the math yourself, consult a trusted health expert that truly trusted, and it roughly averages out to like the flu shot doesn't do anything. Maybe it does for some people, maybe it doesn't for others. That's the deal. You can go look up the amount of flu shot lawsuits that are brought up, and the vast majority of flu shot lawsuits end with a compensation. They end by being awarded for that claim. Okay, so what else? We got one more tab over here. Okay, this is the CDC 6%. Like I said, you could just go over here, and on this one I put World Health 10%. I don't even know why I put World Health, because like I said, it's such big data. I could put 10% infected, and it's still going to come up. 10% of the world infected with COVID-19. Who? 10% of the world, COVID-19. 10%. 10%. Every single one of these. Some Testmore prison staff, 10% of inmates infected. So 10% by these places, all of them. You know what I mean? So it's like, there you go. Like, that's how popular 10% infected is. Okay, then if you go over here to CDC and just punch in CDC 6%, that's how this pops right up to the top of the list. COVID-19 provisional counts, Center for Disease Control, straight from the horse right here. And from the top of this page, let's go back up here. I'm going to hit Control F, and that pops up my search box, and I can type in 6%, and it takes me right down here. Table 3 shows the types of health conditions and contributing causes mentioned in conjunction with the deaths involving coronavirus disease 2019 COVID-19. For 6% of the deaths, COVID-19 was the only cause mentioned. So for only 6% of deaths that were COVID-19 related, or if you want to say that, they're people who tested or presumed positive of COVID-19, whether or not that was a factor, it's hard to say sometimes, or whether or not it was even a primary cause. They may have just coincidentally had that. The average morbidity rate is comorbidity rate, which means other factors that are just as likely or more to have contributed as a cause of death, things like such as terminal cancer, acute respiratory distress syndrome, pneumonia, other things that could cause especially somebody elderly to die, which the vast majority of people who die of influenza, pneumonia, and COVID are very elderly. Only 6% of those people tested or presumed positive for only COVID, to where they were like, okay, this person had no underlying conditions, basically. And underlying conditions doesn't just mean, a broken leg or something. It means that an underlying condition that very likely could have been a contributor or a co-contributor. And the thing is, if they have 2 or more, 2.5, that technically for rounding, that rounds up to 3, right? 2, that means at least two other major causes. You know what I mean? Especially if it's a young person. Like if it's somebody under 65, it's almost guaranteed they have, either one severe thing, like, I'm sorry to say, like a terminal cancer or a severe case of diabetes, things like that. There's always something like that usually with them. And the cases are very few and far between, if you notice, and the news will, of course, cherry pick those, and they won't mention those comorbidities. So that's suspect of why aren't they mentioning these comorbidities at all? Why aren't we getting fair and unbiased news on this stuff? It's so rare. The fair and unbiased news is like so much the exception these days. It's bizarre. So for 6%, COVID-19 was the only cause mentioned. So if we come over here into that calculator, and this is saying this is the death rate, but now let's find what is 6% of this. So do that of symbol, mathematically speaking, and 0.06. So that's the decimal representation of 6%, the mathematical representation of the word of, and the percentage worldwide case fatality rate of COVID according to the World Health. We're now factoring in the CDC focusing in on who has specifically died. I don't think there's such thing as definite, but more definitely of COVID according to the CDC against the World Health numbers. And right here you have 6% of that number. Please double check my math on this. Would be a 0.009 when rounding up, or 0.0088% of people have died of COVID specifically without having anything else that contributed to it. So there you go on that. And that is a fraction of what's going on over here. Look into those influenza deaths and decide for yourself. I'd encourage you to do that and see, are these saying that, who contracted influenza died from it specifically, And so in this case, I could argue that if one were to make the determination that these people died primarily of influenza and not likely anything else, then that's what you're seeing here as well, right? So that's CDC 6% for that search. And this was 10% infected for the World Health Organization numbers. And then this was the Oregon page here. If you want to get the current Oregon data, less than 1,000 people in the entire state. And Kate Brown's Instagram page. So I don't see how that, this is less than 1% for both of these situations, where it's just like, what's going on here? I mean, even if we round this, like if we take this number that we know can't be really any higher, we would be wrong to fudge it any higher according to the data we're going against. Even if we go, okay, let's round this to 1 right here, we can do that. We can say, okay, I want to get this decimal place, just 1, 0 point whatever. Then we can safely say, hey, we're going to round this 8 up to 1. That's 1/10 of 1%. And that's wrong to round it up that high, You could technically probably do that, because if you factor they're not going to take an estimation of the world's population until like next March, then, or probably February, and then the numbers get printed March, whatever. So they, the number will be looking closer to that, I would imagine, by then. But still, that's 1 in 1,000. That's 1 in 1,000 presumed or tested positive cases of people that they're going to say died with COVID. With COVID, not necessarily of it, but with it. If you want to say most likely with it, then you're here. We could round this one up to 0.01. So that would mean 1 in 10,000 people, right? Because 100 is, or excuse me, a percent is per 100. Then the first column would be per 1,000, and this would be per 10,000. So 1 in 10,000 people that get COVID, most likely elderly probably, will die of it.